Last time on the WizardCast.
Something's been bothering me, Mark.
What's that?
I can't figure out who booked Parker Harris for our 100th episode. It wasn't me. You claim it wasn't you.
Yeah, wait, what do you mean claim?
The game is afoot, Watson. Russ.
No. This is going to be stupid. Is this the mysterious case of who booked them?
It's quite elementary, my dear Rustin. Clearly, if neither you nor I were the culprit, there can only be one answer.
And that would be...
someone else!
By Jove, that's true and completely obvious. You make a terrible Sherlock Holmes.
Hush! I must contemplate the ramifications. Where's my violin?
Whoa, hang on, that's my violin. No.
I must have quiet! I am accessing my little brain attic.
Oh, God. It's painful.
When we met this morning, I said you didn't book Parker.
Yes, I did, you know.
I didn't know. I saw. Your haircut, the way you hold yourself, says technical career, but your conversation when you entered this room...
I had said this was stupid.
Said that you were likely a documentation writer, obviously. You have no tan, especially above the wrist, so you're obviously working from home. When you walk, you cradle your wrist as if it pains, but you don't ask for support when you type, likely because you've forgotten about since it's partly psychosomatic, which means the original circumstances were diffused over time, most likely from losing too many video games in your off hours.
Hey.
Your shoes leave absolutely no prints, your soul is clean, not a speck of dirt. Says you rarely, if ever, leave your house. The ring on your left hand clearly states you're married, a wife. Based on your obsession with various activities and hobbies, I would guess foreign, most likely Japanese, no? British with a distinct accent, judging from how you pronounce your vowels.
Brian, you have met my wife.
Shot in the dark, really. Good one, though.
This is so stupid.
Do you think so?
Quite extraordinarily stupid.
That's not what people normally say.
And what do people normally say?
Shut up, Brian!
And now the conclusion of the WizardCast.
I'm Brian Kwong.
And I'm Mark Ross.
We're Salesforce experts that love talking about technology and Salesforce.
We also love humor. Doesn't mean we're actually good at it.
In the Salesforce community, I'm known as the Salesforce Wizard, likely due to me wearing a wizard hat at Salesforce events.
And I'm known as Salesforce Yoda for pretty much the same reason.
You should see the ears.
We have a passion to help educate and entertain people.
So we've joined forces to create WizardCast.
We've got tips and best practices.
We talk with interesting people.
All mixed with quote-unquote jokes and humor.
Welcome to the WizardCast.
Brian, whoa! What are you doing?
Practicing, Mark. I must prepare for my duel.
Your what?
My duel!
I think you mean duel.
That's what I said.
Okay, what type of duel?
It's a sword fight.
All right, then why are you flailing a piece of cheese around?
It's cheddar. Extra sharp.
Is there something else we can talk about?
Well, there's this really cool thing, and I know it has nothing to do with Dreamforce, but a whole bunch of YouTube content creators started this thing called Team Trees, all about trying to plant 20 million trees by 2020.
No, I saw this thing, and it actually looks legit. It's Arbor Day Foundation is behind it.
Yep, and Arbor Day Foundation basically said for every $1 donated, they will plant one tree. So $1, one tree, $10, 10 trees. And we are hoping that people will all chip in to raise $20 million so we can plant 20 million trees before 2020.
That's right. So we just need 20 million of you to donate $1. If you could do that, please, that would be fantastic.
Yep, teamtrees.org. Last I look, as we're recording this, there are already over 10 million, which is pretty darn cool.
Wait, how could we have had 10 million? We haven't talked about it yet.
Because other people who do better content more frequently and have a lot more followers started this.
What? Why would we? Oh, man.
Yeah.
I thought this was your idea.
No,
I'm disappointed.
We don't have the 20 million subscribers like Mr. Beast, so best we can do is maybe 200 trees by 2025.
Mr. Who now?
So Dreamforce is coming up. As a matter of fact, it's probably just, 2 weeks away by the time most people listen to this?
Just about. It's creeping up.
We're going to be doing something a little different because Mark is leaving me high and dry this year.
Nope, sorry, you're on your own.
Yep. So normally we do, anywhere between 1 to 3 episodes of the podcast live recording at Dreamforce with Mark kind of somewhat as a host when he shows up.
Yeah. Let's not beat around the bush here. You do half of these things without me anyway.
That's because you never show up on time. I still remember
That's because
the one
I have things to do,
we said,
places
hey,
to go.
let's go record at that party, and then you show up like 2 hours late.
I was at another party before that.
And you neglected to like tell me. I'm like sending you messages like, hey, where are you? I'm here.
My phone was dying.
You know, all I hear is excuses from you, Mark.
Not excuses, they're
Anyways,
reasons.
This year, Mark is not going to Dreamforce.
No.
I will be going to Dreamforce, and I still plan on recording at least one, maybe 2 episodes. I'm trying to track down some replacement co-hosts. And
temporary replacement co-hosts. Don't let it get to your head.
We'll see. And hopefully we're going to try to do something a little bit different than just having me walking around and talking. So stay tuned during the week of Dreamforce for at least 1, maybe up to 3 episodes of the WizardCast.
And lest you think, Brian, that I'm not going to be involved, you're still going to send me the files, right? So I can do the editing.
Oh, I certainly hope so, because my editing's awful.
Well, I mean, it's why I do it.
I usually post in the same day I record them. So, I mean, what kind of your turnaround are you going to promise?
I can promise 4 nines of availability.
I don't even know what that means. 4 nines of availability?
You'll have to look it up.
Is that 9s as in the number 9?
No, it's 4 people, 4 Germans standing in a row, all saying no.
This year, I'm doing something special. I'm part of the AppExchange Street team.
And what is that, Brian?
It's a group of a whole bunch of people that support the AppExchange, and we are there to help promote everything. And one of the things that people can do is if you see someone from the street team, you can go up and get a selfie with them and then share it on Twitter by going saying like my favorite AppExchange solution or my favorite consultant, and use the hashtag Appy, APPY, and you can get a chance to win $50, which is kind of cool, right?
Nice.
You do need to follow the AppExchange Twitter, which is at AppExchange, but you know, that's kind of a fun way to potentially earn $50. There's supposedly going to be other swag and things like that you can get from the street team members as well. There are links in the show notes to the Twitter post that kind of shows all the people involved with the street team, as well as a link to the blog post to kind of expand upon it. There's an actual introduction with our guest today that I have already recorded when I was interviewing him. But I think it's safe to say that this is someone that people who've been listening to the podcast for a long time are familiar with hearing his voice over our podcast. When I went down to Chicago at MidWest Dreamin back in August, July, sometime.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Back when temperatures were significantly warmer than they are now. I got to sit down with Peter Coffey. We had a lovely discussion that didn't include Mark. So it's just me and Peter. And so here is our typical coffee break, where except for it's basically a much longer thing where Peter's actually talking instead of Mark and I talking about Peter.
I'll try not to be jealous.
So for long-term WizardCast fans, you probably are very familiar with a guest who has been on our podcast more than any other guest, and that's Peter Coffey, and I believe it's VP of Strategic Research.
That's right, Brian, yes.
So thank you, Peter, for coming on. I think this might be the 5th time, or at least 5th episode we've had you.
Well, given that it's so difficult to get me to shut up, you usually get a couple of chapters out of each interview, so how you count the episodes is really up to you.
As a co-host that really hates creating content, I appreciate being able to get multiple episodes out of a single individual.
That's what editing tools are for.
Yes.
And if we wind up chaptering this one, that'll be fine.
Absolutely. So we're at MidWest Dreamin. You gave the introduction to Chris Landy's keynote.
Yes.
And one of the things that really took me in your introduction was changing the way how we think of what Salesforce is. That
Sure.
it's not the platform anymore. It's not a CRM anymore. That's really all about data.
Yeah.
Can you kind of share with our listeners
Sure. Well, if you
what
look
that
at
was?
the history of Salesforce, it was born with the idea that a reasonable, powerful business application could be offered on the internet at a time when that was a radical idea, when the internet was where you got generic, low criticality consumer stuff. And Mark said, the internet can do more than this, and I'm going to demonstrate that by taking CRM, the application that the largest number of companies need but have failed to deploy successfully, and bringing that to market. And he actually referred to the first generation Salesforce once as our little contact manager in the cloud. merely the idea that you didn't need to own hardware, install software, and pay someone to run it for you when what you really wanted to do was have a lean, mean selling machine. That was a radical idea. But then in 2004, many people have heard this story from me. I was in LA at the time, and Mark was being honored by USC as a distinguished alumnus, and he called me, and I'd known him when he was at Oracle. And he called me, and I'd been out of touch for a few years, and he said, "Do you have time for breakfast?" And we had the conversation about, well, given that making it integratable and configurable has reorganized us into a layer that does CRM on top of a very general purpose platform, Mark asked me, what do you think of this idea of selling a platform license where it doesn't give you the CRM piece but lets you build anything you want on it? Now, at the time, that was a very bold vision because we did not have, or rather he did not have, a programming capability. And whether a programming capability could even be created that wouldn't compromise multi-tenancy and that wouldn't impede upgrades in the way the customization traditionally has done and still continues to do in most enterprise software suites, that was a radical idea.
So this was before Apex?
Pre-Apex.
Wow.
It was 3 years before Apex Code even went into preview that we were having this conversation. So over the next few years, I would have occasional opportunities to touch base with people at Salesforce, and they would show me the things they were working on. And then it was at the end of 06 that I got the call. It said, okay, we're getting ready to go into the market and offer a platform license. We need someone to help us talk to an audience to whom we've never spoken before, which is developers and systems integrators and ISVs. And my job of what was then called head of platform research was created to begin conversations that we hadn't merely not had, but that we'd actively avoided by doing end runs around corporate IT for the first 10 years of the company's history. And so now it was a very straightforward proposition. It was kind of like if Microsoft sold Office or also offered you Windows without Office and maybe some Visual Basic. It was that simple at the time. Well, then we acquired Service Cloud, and then we acquired web services capabilities, and we expanded the suite. And now, if you try to describe Salesforce by enumerating the clouds, well, there's 15 minutes of your 30-minute meeting just gone listing this, what the salespeople call the SKUs, the stock keeping units. The salespeople say, well, what's the SKU on this? Because it's how do I sell this and bill for it?
Right.
Well, you can't have that conversation anymore because it's mind-numbing and it's distracting. It's much more powerful now to go back and look at what the real secret sauce of Salesforce is that scalable, secure, high availability database at the bottom, which it's not a secret, has some Oracle technology in there, but it's really not used even as a relational database. It's being used as a massive key value store, and all of the other capability is the global query optimizer layer that is our proprietary thing that allows it to mimic your private database with acceptable performance while still providing the metadata and multi-tenant universality that allows us to do 3 upgrades a year without breaking stuff. That's really the secret of the Salesforce core technology, and it's a very open public secret.
At the very bottom.
That the multi-tenant metadata-based configurable database. That's what it really is. Well, the challenge that invites is, yeah, but what about all my data that doesn't live in Salesforce? What about my stuff that lives in finance or ERP or that comes from some logistics company or whatever? And we've always had a strong integration story. For many years, we've been able to say we're feature complete at the API level, therefore we can be a hub or we can be a spoke, whatever. But buying Mulesoft made a very decisive, emphatic statement that we are going to be part of your strategy to make all your data more valuable, whether it physically resides in Salesforce or not. And the fact that Mulesoft is an API orientation, it really becomes additional chapters of the dictionary of how to do stuff in Salesforce, which is a really powerful difference between an integration tool that's just a chance to draw a connection diagram. You draw a connection diagram and it's obsolete immediately. But if you build an API, then it's just always growing in a linear way rather than an n-squared kind of way, the way a traditional connectivity view of integration would do. And in Dreamforce 2018, the coolest thing we said when we showed people Customer 360 and a microservices architecture that gave you a virtualized single view of the customer without actually having to construct a physical data lake and all the lift and shift of data that would imply and all the governance challenges that might create. No. Customer 360. The data lives where you choose to keep it for governance purposes, for legacy installed base purposes, whatever. But with Customer 360 and the Mulesoft technology, you can have what looks like that single unified view of the customer, and then the best sentence spoken at Dreamforce 2018. And you all get this. This isn't a product. This is a capability of the platform, and the platform gets better over time, and you all get this capability. Well, that was really exciting. The undropped shoe, as it were, was, yeah, but once I have all that data in one place, what do I do with it? And yes, we've got Analytics Cloud, and it has tremendous capability for visual, interactive exploration of your data, and that's great. The world had also voted with its wallets for another approach to a low-coding, drag-and-drop insight generation tool called Tableau. And now, of course, we have closed that acquisition, but can't really, operate as an integrated company until various other regulatory requirements have been met. But now, if you had just arrived from Mars and you had heard about this thing called Salesforce and you didn't know what it was, and you looked with completely fresh eyes at what we are, we're a capability for taking all that data spread all over your organization. We did a joint study with Deloitte on this subject and found that a typical number is about 39 different systems that represent various fragments and shards of process and identity, all of which have some bearing on any conversation you might need to have with any one customer. 39. And that might not even be counting the spreadsheets. Well, being able to bring that together in ways that actually allow machine learning to learn, that actually allow predictive analytics to predict, that actually allow optimization algorithms to recommend a next best action or a next best offer to a customer, that's fantastically exciting. It solves problems that have been recognized problems for decades, but now we finally have the raw material of connectivity and computation capability, and more importantly, in some ways, the philosophical approach that says this is not about stringing wires between boxes. This is about creating a language of process and action and identity in an API kind of world, in a massively connected planet, lavishly furnished with distributed intelligence that recommends what to do with it and doesn't just say, here it is, it's up to you. That's really exciting. And that's why I'm 12 years into what I thought was going to be a 5-year gig when I took the job. And in many ways, I could say very sincerely, now we can finally get started.
You said you were talking about a difference between the API and the connection line. And
yes.
When you draw the connection line, it's almost immediately out of date.
When you draw a diagram of connections to the data sources you know about, the minute that another one gets added, that's n new lines that have to be drawn. And the total number of lines on that diagram grows roughly with the square of the number of different sources and consumers of data. It's not scalable, it's not maintainable, it's not reportable, it's not governable, and it's the best we've had until we saw the genuinely different conceptual approach that was taken by the guys who started Mulesoft. And I'd have been perfectly happy if we could have bought them for $2 billion 2 years earlier, but we didn't underpay. I mean, we didn't overpay. We did not overpay for what it's brought to our ability to tell this data-oriented story to our customers, because the most important insight, I took a long time before I said most, but I'm going to say the most important insight about AI is that the things that they thought were impressive parlor tricks back in the 50s and 60s, logic and inference and deduction and optimization, those turn out to be quite straightforward compared to the task of wrangling your data. And being able to say to people, hey, this is where most AI efforts have failed to get out of the lab and get into a production scenario with an enterprise kind of life cycle and a real-world level of governability and regulatory compliance. Getting the data to the point where it's a nicely set table for the beast instead of just a dog's breakfast has been a tremendous challenge. I really feel we've cracked that problem now.
I may be suffering from perspective problems. from my point of view, the majority of the admins and developers I meet work for what I would say are more medium-sized companies, not like the Coca-Colas and the GEs of the world.
Yeah.
And when I have conversations with them, it's very focused on I'm trying to solve a particular process problem. Yes. And a lot of people don't seem to understand why Salesforce did something like purchase Mulesoft or purchase Tableau, beyond the, okay, well, I guess now there's an actual system now that instead of using Informatica or whatever, I just use Salesforce's Mulesoft version, and they're looking at very simply of moving data from one point to the other. From what I think you're saying is it's more than that.
Yeah. We remain a substantial investor in Informatica. We continue to have cordial relationships with Cast Iron at IBM, with Boomi over at Dell, with every other important integration provider, with Jitterbit, who's been a part of some tremendously successful Salesforce stories. Interestingly, the way that Jitterbit talks about what they do, where they build engines of process and value creation that do integration as an enabler for the really important thing, which is to produce a value-adding process. So we don't plan to crush them. But bringing Mulesoft in allows us to deal with some of the growth rings that have built up in our own environment over the years with all the acquisitions we've made. It's no longer something that was written on one sheet of paper and all grew in a nice orderly way. There are some different data architectures and technologies within the company. So having Mulesoft in the company is important to that. And it has also given us a presence in companies that didn't think they had any reason to talk to Salesforce, and now by virtue of already being Mulesoft customers, they are our customer, and we have a chance to simply have conversations with them that we did not before. So I would never say this is what you use instead of other things. It's an important option that we hope people will find available. It's tremendously important that people realize that it's not going to be limited to your Salesforce resident data, because you don't buy Switzerland and turn it into a walled garden. Mulesoft's value is largely the perception that it connects everything to everything.
And that's something I didn't really think of with... I've made this joke on the podcast before of what the heck is Salesforce buying now? Because it seems like every other month or so, there's at least a announcement.
We announced ClickSoft yesterday.
I saw that. I actually was walking down Wabash trying to find something to eat when I got the little news blurb, and I literally said, what the... Did they just buy now?
Yes.
And I didn't really think about it, the fact that now with the purchase of Mulesoft, you have an integration system, not just to integrate Salesforce with other companies' products, but you have something to integrate Salesforce products with that you've acquired.
Well, Parker Harris once said about our merger and acquisition strategy that it's traditional in this industry to buy technology or to think that you're buying customers, but at Salesforce we buy the teams that we want to have working with us. It's a fallacy to believe that you can acquire a customer base. You might acquire an opportunity to have conversations with them, but to think that you own them, there are plenty of companies that I won't name because some of them are among our biggest customers who have an unfortunate history of buying a company, chewing it up, assimilating it, and spitting out something worth 1/10 as much a few years later. And that's not us. I think I could accurately say that Parker would want our M&A strategy to be judged by how many of the people who made a company worth acquiring are still with us and having the time of their lives 2 years after the fact, instead of just waiting for their lockup period to expire and taking their check and going away. They stick around because we grow their companies in place. We give them a bigger war chest. We are hiring in Halifax, where Radian 6 got its start. We're hiring big in Burlington, Massachusetts, where what's now Salesforce Commerce Cloud grew and thrived. And why would we rip them all up, rip the plant up to see how the roots are doing and transplant them somewhere else? That would be crazy. Brett Taylor, one of our senior managers, has said recently that over the next few years, a high priority for Salesforce is to start behaving like a global company and not a San Francisco company with some branch offices. And I see a commitment to that already in the way that we're hiring talent in Hyderabad, in Burlington, Mass., in other places that are absolutely not within sight of Salesforce Tower. And that's another important part of the story about how Salesforce is changing. We're not a one-trick pony selling to Silicon Valley startups. We are a global force for making data available to people who want to change the world in whatever way they choose, whether that's a commercial idea or a nonprofit humanitarian idea or a government idea. The conversations we're having with institutions in education, healthcare, government are about what's possible to do now, not about the stuff we'll sell them, but about the stuff they can do that they simply couldn't do before. And that's what puts me on planes. I had to figure out how many days I was not in my office last year for purposes of a commuting survey, and it was 198 days last year. And I'd be happy to do this all by telepresence if I could, but I can't because I have to be in the room with people, getting them to understand. This is something I've said a number of times lately. The well-balanced human being doesn't get up in the morning and begin the day with a mental enumeration of all the things that piss them off. They don't. That's not what we'd call a well-tempered mind.
Let's wake up on the wrong side of the bed.
Yeah. And yet, in many ways, my job is to get people angry all over again at things that being well-balanced, well-adjusted people they've learned to tolerate, that they've learned to accept, and I have to get them to stop accepting things that they no longer have to tolerate, but that they've learned to stop exploring because they'd gotten the same answer for the first 30 years of their careers. And going into an industry like oil and gas or automotive manufacturing and getting them to believe that the next 3 years will change their business more than the past 30. That's a reality. That's not a Silicon Valley fantasy. These are things that are actually happening.
One of our previous conversations, we talked about having admins and developers being the stewards of change in their organizations.
Yes.
And
in many cases, the stealth terminators of legacy thinking.
Right. Killing those spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And now that we're moving into this world where it's really about data visibility and what you were doing with the data.
Yes.
And like you just said, that part of your job is going in and essentially making people angry over the things that they've learned to accept.
Yes.
Right? What advice would you have for those of us who are trying to be those stewards of change, especially considering that a lot of knee-jerk iteration is not to make people angry at us, right? So do you have a recommendation of how we can be the stewards of change to move the perspective of our company from, well, Salesforce is just where we do our sales or service, to being more of a data-oriented?
Many people have told us stories about how Salesforce platform became important to their companies. Almost none of them begin with a company choosing to acquire a platform. In most cases, our platform role was discovered rather than acquired. And it was discovered when someone finally threw up their hands and did have an eruption saying, I'm so tired of getting along without this, or I'm so tired of this being done so badly. Isn't there anything that can do this? This often happens when, for example, the tool of first resort for the rapidly changing, poorly defined problem, namely the spreadsheet, has led to a data breach or a process flaw. If you Google European Spreadsheet Risks Interest Group, you'll find a beautifully curated website of spreadsheet horror stories where someone thought that they were just uploading a table of data, and it turns out that they were uploading a spreadsheet with hidden columns and other stuff, and that there was all sorts of highly sensitive data that they had inadvertently exposed because it was easy to do, and they did. And inviting people to walk around with you and look for places where a critical piece of corporate process or a critical repository of corporate data has wound up being in a spreadsheet or a FileMaker database or something, and say, now, let's talk about how quickly this could be secure, mobile-capable, inherently collaborative, upgraded 3 times a year, and data backup no longer your problem, by moving this capability into a Force.com application, which we could do literally in a matter of hours. And no capital budget is needed because they already have the licenses, the subscriptions, I should say, and no new headcount is needed. And the skills involved are really no greater than those involved in doing really advanced and complicated and exotic and fragile and blows-up-in-your-face spreadsheets. Only Trailhead gives you a certifiable credential that becomes a resume enhancer. So we've really solved the whole problem here. We've made it attractive to do this. We've made it a career-enhancing thing to do it. We've given people a portable credentialing system that makes them personally beneficiaries of the investment they make in that technology. And that's how you get people to understand this isn't adding macros to the CRM. This is looking through the trapdoor in the floor of the CRM and saying, holy smoke, look at all the stuff that's in here, and we can use this to solve problems that we've already identified, or else there wouldn't be the spreadsheet. But now we can solve them in ways that are far more robust and lower in many forms of risk than doing these things in spreadsheets.
Mark and I, we like to have this conversation where everyone has their own personal narrative.
Yes.
And that narrative is really what defines what we think we are and how we want to basically interact with the world around us.
Yep.
And that the biggest challenge of persuasion is having to change someone else's personal narrative, or at least make them think that they need to change their personal narrative. So when we're being stewards of change and we're going up to that VP of sales, the president of the company, the CIO, who their personal narrative is set back, like the folks in the oil and gas who don't believe that their world is going to change in 3 years more than the last 30.
Yeah.
What things could we try to say or do to help change that narrative, to change the perception, so we can make them be more focused on, like, using the data for the company for going forward?
Difference, I believe, is between saying to someone you're doing it wrong, which creates a desire to prove that you're the one who's wrong, or saying to someone, you've been right for so long, and I'm here to share with you the opportunity to continue being right in an environment of rapid change. You're not saying you've been doing it wrong. You're saying you've shown tremendous ability to thrive in the environment you've been in. And I'm here today to help you recognize, anticipate, and exploit the environment as it is going to be, rather than having to react to it later on. And be a leader in embracing those new realities rather than a laggard who has to defend against other people's exploitation of those new realities. You don't get to decide whether an Uber is going to enter the personal transportation space with a radical solution. If you're a taxi cab company, your notion of how to improve your operations would concentrate on higher mileage, lower maintenance costs, fewer accidents, better dispatching, operational efficiencies. That's what you would do. It might not occur to you that from your customer's point of view, the biggest problem is finding out how long it's going to take to get a cab, being sure the cab is going to show up on time, and getting rid of that annoying process at the end of the trip of having to pay for it and haggle over whether they'll use the credit card or not. Uber widened the frame of reference to beyond what happens in the vehicle to look at the whole customer need of, this is where I am, this is where I want to be, this is when I want to get there, go. And being Uberized does not mean that Uber had secret route maps or faster flying cars. They didn't solve any of those taxi efficiency problems. Essentially, they accepted all of the limitations and realities of streets, cars, and drivers as a platform and said, but now how do we add value to that platform? And asking any company, you look at the way that an ExxonMobil, great Salesforce customer, thinks about its role as an energy and chemistry company. They talk about lubricants not as molecules, but as improvers of the efficiency of their customers' operations. Better lubricants mean that your machinery lasts longer and runs better. Better plastics, better fertilizers. They're very, very good at talking about what they do, not as getting molecules out of the ground, turning them into products and shipping the products. They're very, very good at working with their customers to be seen as co-inventors of improved solutions that, include some expertise in getting a hydrocarbon molecule into a can or a bottle or a barrel or whatever, But their brand is about the problems they solve, not the products they deliver. And I think everyone, whether you're talking about yourself as an individual, networking in your company or in your industry, or your company, or even your entire industry, should be asking, how do we reframe ourselves not as the thing we sell or the service we perform, but the need we meet? Because lots of interesting pivots in what an organization does have resulted from that kind of thinking.
One of the things I love about our conversations is, other than the fact that I always walk away from you feeling both smarter and dumber at the same time, is every meeting we have, there's always something you have to recommend to read.
Sure.
So, considering our topic is all about data visibility, is there anything that you would recommend for us to go out and read or use as a resource to try to learn more about this, or to give us more thinking material to just think about this particular topic?
For some time, I've been recommending a book called Leading Digital, which is written by two gentlemen I know at MIT, George Westerman and Andy McAfee, and also someone I know at Capgemini named Didier Bonnet. What I like about it is that they've done an admirable job of saying and proving with research that companies that adopt technology aggressively without a guiding transformative vision may enjoy revenue improvement, but may actually reduce their profitability. Companies that have a transformative vision but are timid about the adoption of technology very well may improve profitability, but those that do both, have a transformative vision and aggressively adopt technology to support it, soar in profitability. Off the charts improvements. And that one message in that book is really powerful. More recently, another book also out of the MIT Media Lab is called Whiplash, which was co-authored by the guy who runs Media Lab and also by, I think he's a writer at Wired Magazine. It's quite anecdotal, quite personal. Some reviewers don't like that. They're looking for a drier, more analytic treatment. But it really is about grasping the reality of the accelerating times we're in. And Pat Gelsinger at VMware has famously said, try to wrap your head around this idea. The pace of change that everyone finds so challenging today is the slowest pace of change you'll have the luxury of enjoying for the rest of your life. Everything is accelerating. And when you genuinely accept that idea, that you're in an accelerating frame of reference, you don't just try to do what you're doing now better, faster, cheaper. You really have to reevaluate what it is you're doing. In particular, many of our Salesforce partners tell me their challenge today is getting their customers not to think of what they do as a series of projects, that the outcome of transformation should not be a step change transformed company, but should rather be a new culture capable of continuous transformation henceforth. And the analogy that I've made is that if a Star Trek transporter beams you up into a starship, that's great until you realize that you arrived in the ship stationary while the ship is doing warp 3 and the back wall hits you in the butt. You have to elevate your altitude while simultaneously increasing your speed, and in fact, in an accelerating frame, being able to continue increasing your speed, and that's a different challenge than merely getting up to the altitude that the ship is at now.
Right, you need Scotty to do that beaming for you.
You need Scotty to have been thinking about the next step. Once I succeed in getting them into the ship, oh, wait a minute, the ship's going to be moving. I need them to arrive in motion. And if you can just say that one thing, our transformation project can't move us from one stationary point to a different stationary point. It must simultaneously move us and accelerate us so that we arrive moving at the speed of our environment.
I think now that we've gone from the nerdiest part of talking data to going to Star Trek.
Yeah,
I think
we've gotten even nerdier, right?
Yeah, I think we're at a good point for stopping, especially because I believe we're about to lose
the
room.
room's about to get loud. But Brian, it's always a pleasure to remind myself that one of the best things about MidWest Dreamin is that I can almost certainly have a chance to find out what I actually think by having you ask. My brain operates like Schrodinger's cat. I don't know whether what's inside is alive or dead until someone opens the lid.
So your brain's a quantum computer. That's
pretty
wonderful.
much. Yeah, and in fact, we may yet find out that the reason that it's been so difficult to build machines that work like brains is that we hadn't built meaningful quantum computers yet.
Well, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Peter. You're always welcome to
Thank
come
you,
on
Brian.
our podcast at any time.
Thanks so much.
WizardCast is produced by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, directed by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, technical administration by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, script writing by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, audio editing by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, website maintenance by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, and our intern this episode was Stephen Harrington.
And you can be an intern too. Just follow us at WizardCast_pod on Twitter.
Or you can take pictures at places like Dreamforce and share them on our social media, and we'll make sure you get added to the list.
Have a joke, interview suggestion, or other comments? Let us know. You can call and leave a voice recording at 608-492-0321 or email wizardcast@thewizardnews.com.
And we will be doing another Idea Exchange highlight, and this is where we talk about ideas on the Idea Exchange. So let us know what you would like us to talk about.
Go to bit.ly/idea highlight to submit that idea to us.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WizardCast and receive our next episode automagically.
And please post reviews on Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, and share this episode. It helps others to hear what you just had to endure.
Once again, I'm Brian.
And I'm going to be enjoying Dreamforce from my office. Maybe I'll pull in a deck chair and just kind of lounge and take it easy with enjoying all the space and the access to food and drink that I wouldn't have if I were there on the floor. Just kind of spread out.
You know what? I think you just don't want to do the walking. Thanks for listening. You have no tan, especially above the waist.
Safe harbor.
The whist.
With
The whist. The whist. Come now. You must know what I'm talking about. The whist.